I am Liam. I am 34 years old, and exactly 3 months ago, at my younger brother's incredibly lavish, obscenely expensive wedding, he decided to use his groom's speech to completely destroy my life. While I was sitting there, struggling to hold on to my dignity in a cheap, 5-year-old clearance rack suit, my own brother looked out at 200 of the city's most elite guests and declared that my son and I were completely unwanted garbage. He laughed, the crowd laughed, and just to make sure the knife went deep enough, my own mother shouted across the ballroom that I was a used product. They humiliated a single father in front of his 8-year-old boy. But there was one major detail my arrogant brother and my image-obsessed mother did not know. They had absolutely no idea that the bride, the woman whose family wealth was funding this entire circus, had just uncovered a financial secret about my brother that was about to turn this wedding into a public execution of his character. And they definitely did not know that by the end of the night, my brother would be facing a massive lawsuit, and my mother would be leaving voicemails begging me for forgiveness. Before I tell you exactly how this spectacular, satisfying downfall happened, please hit that like button if you truly believe that karma always comes to collect its debts. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Now, let's go back to the exact moment everything shattered. I never thought pure humiliation could come wrapped in imported silk, smelling of expensive lilies, roasted prime rib, and aged champagne. I was sitting at table 9, breathing in the heavy, perfumed air of the grand ballroom at the sprawling Oakwood Country Club. The chandeliers suspended high above us looked like they were constructed from spun ice, casting a warm, golden glow over the immaculate, towering floral arrangements that cost more than my annual salary. I was wearing the only formal suit I owned. It was a charcoal gray two-piece I had bought on clearance 5 years ago for a job interview. I kept tugging at my collar, desperately trying to blend into a massive sea of designer evening gowns, custom-tailored tuxedos, and diamond necklaces that caught the light with every movement. Right next to me, my 8-year-old son, Leo, was happily swinging his legs back and forth under the table. He looked so incredibly handsome in his tiny navy blazer. I had worked double shifts at the logistics warehouse and skipped lunch for 3 solid weeks just to afford that little jacket for him. He thought this day was pure magic. He thought the towering cake looked like a castle. More than anything, he thought this day meant we were finally going to be a real, accepted part of the family again. Maybe, deep down in some foolish, unhealed part of my own heart, I had desperately hoped for that too. My younger brother, Julian, was the absolute star of the room. He always was, ever since the day he was born. He floated effortlessly from table to table with his blindingly perfect teeth and his tailored Italian tuxedo, charming the wealthy guests, kissing the hands of older socialites, and soaking up the endless stream of adoration. Our mother, Eleanor, followed him around the ballroom like he was visiting royalty. She constantly adjusted his lapels. She bragged loudly to anyone who would listen about his supposed recent promotion and his brilliant, lucrative future in commercial real estate. Julian got the applause, the toasts, and the pride. I got the side eye, the whispered gossip, and the pity. He got the blinding spotlight. I learned a long time ago how to survive in the cold shadows. But I showed up anyway. I swallowed my pride and I showed up for my son. I smiled until my jaw ached. I clapped politely when they cut the 5-tier cake. I kept my voice perfectly steady and pleasant when distant relatives walked by our table, looked me up and down and asked, "So, Liam, still working the night shift at that hotel? Still raising the boy all by yourself?" Then the dinner plates were cleared, the lights dimmed, and it was time for the speeches. The best man went first, delivering a standard, mildly amusing speech about their wild college days and frat house shenanigans. Light laughter filled the room. Then it was Julian's turn. I expected him to talk about his beautiful, intelligent bride, Elena. I expected sentimental words about their future, maybe a charming joke about building a family and growing old together. I even raised my crystal water glass, fully ready to toast to his happiness and put our complicated past behind us for one night. I should have known better. I really should have known. Julian confidently grabbed the microphone from the stand. He flashed that signature, deeply arrogant smile and looked out over the massive crowd. He thanked everyone for traveling to be there. He talked about how much he deeply loved Elena and her wonderful family. And then he paused. The spotlight operator literally shifted the heavy beam, scanning the dark room until the blinding white light landed directly on table 9. On me. I want to take a moment to give a very special shout-out to my older brother, Liam, Julian said, his voice echoing powerfully through the massive sound system. I sat up a little straighter in my chair. I looked down at Leo, who was beaming with pure pride, thrilled to hear his dad's name over the speakers. For a fleeting, incredibly stupid second, I actually believed Julian was going to say something kind. I thought he was going to publicly bridge the gap between us. Julian leaned closely into the microphone, his eyes locking onto mine through the bright light. Liam has always been such a unique example to me. He is a single father, completely alone, unwanted by absolutely anyone else. A ripple of confused chuckles rolled through the front tables. My stomach dropped like a lead weight. I thought I had misheard him. The acoustics in the room were echoing, but he kept going, his voice dripping with heavy, condescending fake sympathy. But seriously, everyone, let's hear it for him. It takes a massive amount of guts to show up here today in that suit when your life is that much of a disaster. Give it up for the ultimate cautionary tale, my big brother. The confused chuckles turned into a massive, rolling roar. The entire room erupted into laughter. Real, deep, unfiltered laughter. People at the front tables were actually clinking their champagne glasses together like he had just delivered the punchline of the century. My heart pounded so violently in my chest I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The heat rushed to my face, burning my cheeks. I was completely paralyzed. I did not know where to look. I could not breathe. Then, I felt a small tug on my sleeve. Leo looked up at me. His little voice cut through the deafening noise of 200 people laughing at us. His voice was trembling. Dad? Why is Uncle Julian saying those mean things? Why are they laughing at you? Before I could even swallow the massive lump in my throat to answer my son, my mother's voice pierced the air. She did not even need a microphone. She just yelled from her prime seat at the head table, making sure her voice carried over the music. He is a used product. But hey, at least he stayed in the back and didn't ruin the professional wedding photos. The laughter grew sharper. It grew infinitely crueler. It was the specific kind of laughter that strips you entirely bare, that cuts straight through your skin and shatters your bones. It was the exact moment I realized that these people did not see me as a guest. They did not see me as family. They saw me as pure entertainment, as the village idiot, as a punching bag to make themselves feel vastly superior. My fingers curled tightly into fists under the table. I gripped my linen napkin so hard my knuckles turned completely white. I looked around the room desperately, searching the crowd, hoping to find just one single person with a shred of human decency who might meet my eyes with compassion. My Uncle Raymond, who always claimed he loved me like a son, just looked down at his plate and rigidly refused to meet my gaze. Julian's groomsmen were openly high-fiving each other. I looked back down at Leo. His little eyebrows were furrowed. His face crumpled in pure confusion and deep, profound hurt. That was the exact part that broke me. It was not the cruel words. It was not the public shame. It was the devastating fact that they were slaughtering my dignity in front of my little boy, forcing him to watch the father he viewed as a superhero get treated like absolute garbage by his own blood relatives. I aggressively pushed my chair back. It scraped loudly and harshly against the marble floor. I did not care about causing a scene anymore. I was going to grab Leo's hand, walk straight out of those heavy oak doors, and never look back. I was ready to sever every tie I had to this toxic bloodline. But before I could stand up completely, a sharp, deafening screech of audio feedback echoed violently through the speakers. Elena, the bride, had stood up. She did not look amused. She did not look at the laughing crowd. She did not look at my mother. She marched directly over to Julian, snatched the microphone right out of his hands with aggressive force, and turned to face the entire room. Her face was pale, her jaw set like absolute stone. The laughter died instantly. The temperature in the room felt like it dropped 20 degrees. The entire ballroom froze in dead silence. And as Elena looked directly at me with a fierce, burning anger in her eyes, I realized this wedding was not going to end with a dance. It was about to become a funeral for my brother's pride. To truly understand how we arrived at this freezing point in a luxury ballroom, you have to understand the deeply unbalanced, incredibly toxic dynamics of my family. In our house, there was always a very clear, unspoken hierarchy. Julian was the golden child, the prized investment, the future legacy. I was the practice run, the constant disappointment, the designated scapegoat. Growing up, the differences in how we were treated were not subtle. They were glaringly obvious. If Julian managed to get a B on a high school math test, my parents immediately took him out for an expensive steak dinner to celebrate his tremendous effort. If I brought home an A- on a final exam, my father, Arthur, would simply look at the paper, sigh heavily, and ask why I could not manage to get a perfect score like the neighbor's kids. My mother, Eleanor, lived exclusively for appearances. She was completely obsessed with climbing the ranks of the neighborhood HOA, securing country club memberships she could not really afford, and making absolutely sure everyone in our affluent suburb thought we were the perfect, flawless American family. Julian fit her fake narrative perfectly. He was loud, naturally charming, great at football, and knew exactly how to manipulate adults into liking him. I was quiet, I liked to read history books, and I kept to myself. I did not provide the bragging rights my mother so desperately craved. The defining moment of our youth, the moment that truly set the stage for the rest of our lives, happened when Julian graduated from college. My parents threw a massive, catered party in our backyard. They invited 50 people. At the end of the night, my father stood up, gave a tearful speech about how proud he was, and tossed Julian a heavy set of keys. Sitting right there in the driveway, wrapped in a giant red bow, was a brand new, jet black Porsche. It was a graduation gift, a massive financial reward for merely existing and scraping by with a business degree. When I had graduated from college 3 years prior, they bought me a sheet cake from the local Walmart, spelled my name wrong on the icing, and immediately started charging me $600 a month in rent to live in my own childhood bedroom while I aggressively looked for a job. I had paid my own way through state school by working grueling night shifts at a diner. I did not have a college fund. My parents had entirely liquidated the small account my grandfather left me to help pay for Julian's private, out-of-state tuition. I learned very early on that in my family, love was entirely conditional, and I simply did not meet the required conditions. Things got significantly worse when I met Chloe. Chloe was incredibly beautiful, restless, and deeply impatient. We fell in love fast and got married way too young. When she got pregnant with Leo, I honestly thought it was the start of a beautiful new chapter. I naively thought that holding their first grandchild might finally soften my parents' cold hearts. I was working a brutal schedule to prepare for the baby. Days at a logistics warehouse driving a forklift, and nights working the graveyard shift as a front desk clerk at a mid-tier hotel. My combined salary barely covered our cramped apartment rent and basic groceries, but I was hustling. I was building a life with my own two hands. Then, the harsh reality of motherhood actually hit Chloe. She did not want the endless sleepless nights. She deeply resented the strict budget constraints. She wanted vacations, nice clothes, and a husband who was not always exhausted. When Leo was just 5 months old, I came home from a brutal 14-hour double shift. It was pouring rain outside. I unlocked the door, expecting to hear the television or smell dinner. Instead, the apartment was dead silent. I dropped my keys and ran to the bedroom. I found Leo in his crib, crying softly, his face red, clutching his little blanket. On the kitchen counter, sitting right next to a towering stack of final notice utility bills, was a single piece of lined notebook paper. It was a hastily written, deeply cowardly note. "I cannot do this anymore, Liam. I want my life back. I am so sorry. Please do not look for me." Underneath that pathetic note was a thick legal envelope. It contained divorce papers she had already signed and notarized, officially abandoning all legal claims to custody. She just vanished into thin air. She left me completely alone with a crying infant, zero savings, and a shattered heart. I was terrified. I called my mother that night, pacing the cheap linoleum floor of my kitchen, holding my crying baby against my chest. I asked her, I practically begged her, if she could just come over for a few hours so I could figure out what to do, so I could just sit down and process the fact that my wife was gone. My mother's response is permanently burned into my brain. She sighed heavily into the receiver, sounding incredibly annoyed. Liam, please. Your father and I are getting ready for a very important charity gala. I told you Chloe was low class from the absolute start. You made your bed, now you have to lie in it. Do not drag us into your dramatic mess. Just hire a babysitter. And then, she hung up the phone. That dial tone was the exact moment I stopped being a son and became a father. Exclusively. I hired a cheap lawyer, fought my way through the legal system, finalized the divorce, and secured full, uncontested custody of Leo. I completely drained what little I had in my 401k to pay the legal fees. I never asked my parents for another dime. I never asked them for a single hour of babysitting. I survived on cheap coffee, sheer stubborn willpower, and the overwhelming, unconditional love I felt every single time Leo smiled up at me. For 8 long years, it was just the two of us against the world. Life was not glamorous. We lived in a small, drafty 2-bedroom apartment near the noisy interstate highway. I still worked 2 exhausting jobs. But we were genuinely happy. I made him Mickey Mouse-shaped pancakes every Sunday morning. I taught him how to ride a bike without training wheels in the empty, cracked asphalt parking lot behind my warehouse. He was my entire universe. Meanwhile, Julian was consistently failing upwards. He bounced effortlessly from job to job, racking up massive amounts of secret credit card debt to desperately maintain his flashy, wealthy lifestyle. He always leased luxury cars he could not afford, always wore heavy designer watches, and my parents always quietly bailed him out whenever his creditors called. He met Elena 3 years ago. Elena was brilliant, incredibly sharp, fiercely independent, and the sole heiress to a massive corporate real estate empire. Her father, Marcus, was the highly respected CEO of a multimillion-dollar firm. Julian had essentially hit the absolute jackpot, and my mother acted as if she had personally orchestrated the entire romance with her own genius. When the heavy, gold-embossed wedding invitation finally arrived in my battered mailbox, my first instinct was to throw it directly into the trash. I ran my calloused thumb over the fancy calligraphy. Mr. Lame and Guest. They purposely spelled my name wrong, and they knew perfectly well I did not have a guest to bring. It was a subtle, highly calculated, petty dig to remind me of my place. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the thick paper. I desperately wanted to RSVP no. I wanted to stay in my safe, quiet, predictable world with my son. But then Leo walked into the kitchen holding his favorite toy dinosaur. He saw the shiny gold envelope gleaming under the kitchen light. "Is that a party invitation, Dad?" he asked, his big eyes wide with excitement. "It is Uncle Julian's wedding, buddy," I said softly, dreading the next question. "Can we go? Please, Dad? I really want to see the giant cake. And I want to see Grandma. I can wear my handsome jacket." My chest tightened painfully. Despite everything they had done, despite the years of cold neglect, Leo still wanted a grandmother. He still desperately wanted an extended family. He did not understand the complex, deeply toxic undercurrents of my bloodline. He just knew he had relatives he rarely saw, and he wanted to belong to them. I looked at his hopeful, innocent face. I swallowed my pride, pushing down the heavy dread in my stomach. I decided right then that I would endure whatever passive-aggressive, cruel nonsense my family threw at me for just one evening, just so my son could eat some fancy cake, dance to the music, and feel like he was part of something bigger. I checked the box for yes. I mailed it back. It was undeniably the worst mistake of my life, but simultaneously, it was the exact catalyst for the greatest, most satisfying justice I would ever witness in my entire existence. The psychological warfare began 3 days before the actual wedding took place. Julian had called my cell phone, his tone unusually pleasant and brotherly, asking if I could come to the historic estate venue early to help set up a few personal, intimate touches. I naively took an unpaid day off from the warehouse, losing much-needed hourly wages that I usually set aside for Leo's future college fund, thinking maybe this was Julian's awkward way of extending a genuine olive branch before he got married. When I arrived at the sprawling, incredibly intimidating stone estate where the reception was being held, I quickly realized I was not there as a brother. I was there as free, disposable manual labor. Julian was standing on the grand marble terrace, wearing expensive designer sunglasses, leisurely sipping sparkling water from a glass flute. He barely looked at me when I walked up. He just pointed a manicured finger toward a massive, idling delivery truck parked in the gravel driveway. "Liam, great, you made it. Listen, the catering and floral crews are short-staffed today. I need you to unload the centerpieces from that truck and carry them into the main banquet hall. Be extremely careful. They are imported crystal and cost more than your car." He did not offer a handshake. He did not ask how Leo was doing in school. He just barked a degrading order and immediately went back to scrolling on his phone. I spent the next 4 grueling hours sweating profusely in the humid summer heat, hauling heavy, awkward wooden crates of elaborate floral arrangements and fragile crystal vases up 2 flights of steep stone stairs. My lower back ached terribly, and my cheap cotton t-shirt was completely soaked in sweat. But I kept my mouth tightly shut. I wiped my forehead, lifted the next crate, and told myself I was doing this to keep the peace for my son's sake. During my only 10-minute break of the afternoon, I walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the estate's massive kitchen to grab a glass of cold tap water. As I passed by the luxurious bridal suite, I heard familiar voices drifting out into the hall. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I stopped in my tracks. I recognized the voices immediately. It was my mother, Eleanor, and her older sister, my Aunt Beatrice. Aunt Beatrice had always perfectly played the role of the sweet, deeply caring, maternal aunt. Just 1 hour earlier, while I was struggling to carry a heavy box of champagne flutes, she had walked past me, patted my sweaty shoulder affectionately, and discreetly slipped a crisp $20 bill into my jeans pocket, whispering sweetly, "Buy something nice for little Leo, dear. I know things are always so tight for you." I had actually felt a genuine pang of profound gratitude in my chest. But standing quietly outside that door, listening to them speak when they thought no one was around, the entire illusion shattered into a million sharp pieces. I absolutely cannot believe Liam actually showed up here today wearing those awful, scuffed dress shoes, Aunt Beatrice said, letting out a sharp, cruel, mocking laugh. I gave him $20 out in the hallway just to see the pathetic, grateful look on his face. He looked exactly like a starving stray dog getting tossed a bone. It is honestly embarrassing to look at him. My mother snorted loudly in agreement. "Oh, do not waste your money on him, Bea. He will probably just spend it on cheap beer or video games anyway." I tried so hard to tell Julian not to invite him at all, but Julian brilliantly insisted. Julian said he desperately needed a good, stark contrast in the room to make himself look even more successful and put together in front of Elena's wealthy corporate family. Showing them the loser brother makes Julian look like he overcame a tragedy. "Well, he certainly is the perfect punchline," Beatrice replied, her voice dripping with venom. "Did you hear what Julian is planning for the main toast tomorrow night?" "Of course I did," my mother said proudly, the smugness radiating through the wood of the door. "I actually helped him write it last night. It is absolutely brilliant. It will clearly show Marcus and Elena just how incredibly far Julian has risen above his tragic, low-class background. Liam is just a convenient prop for tomorrow. Nothing more. Once the wedding is over, we do not have to speak to him until Thanksgiving." I stopped breathing entirely. The air was sucked out of my lungs. The $20 bill sitting in my pocket suddenly felt like a burning, radioactive coal searing against my skin. They did not just tolerate me out of obligation. They actively, maliciously plotted to use my deep pain, my daily struggles as an exhausted single father, as a literal comedic routine to elevate Julian's social status. And my own mother, the woman who brought me into this world, helped write the cruel jokes. I backed away from the door with absolute silence. My hands were shaking so violently I had to press them flat against the hallway wallpaper to steady myself. A cold, dark, terrifying rage started building deep in the pit of my stomach. I wanted to storm into that suite. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. I wanted to throw every single thing they ever did to me right in their perfectly powdered faces. But I didn't. I forced myself to breathe. I went back outside, finished unloading the entire truck in total silence, and drove home. I needed a completely clear head. I knew that if I ruined the wedding before it even started, it would only prove their narrative right. They would paint me as the unstable, jealous brother. I decided I would go, I would fiercely protect Leo, and I would survive the night with my head held high. The morning of the wedding was a chaotic blur of frantic energy. I carefully ironed my charcoal suit in the cramped living room while Leo watched Saturday morning cartoons. I knelt down and helped him put on his little blazer, adjusting the sleeves that were just a tiny bit too long. "You look exactly like James Bond, Dad," Leo said, proudly adjusting his little clip-on tie in the mirror. I forced the biggest, most convincing smile I could muster, looking him directly in the eyes. "And you look like $1,000,000, kiddo. Remember the rules for today. Stay close to you, use my inside voice, and eat as much cake as humanly possible," he recited perfectly, grinning from ear to ear. "Exactly." I kissed his forehead, trying desperately to push down the heavy, suffocating dread swirling in my chest. When we finally arrived at the venue in my beat-up sedan, the atmosphere was suffocatingly rich. A live string quartet was playing classical music near a massive, glowing champagne tower on the lawn. Professional valets in sharp uniforms were rushing back and forth, parking an endless parade of sleek Mercedes, BMWs, and Teslas. Then, pulling up directly to the red carpet entrance, was Julian. He stepped out of his leased Porsche, adjusting his expensive cufflinks, looking exactly like a movie star arriving at a premiere. We walked slowly toward the grand entrance doors. Derek, Julian's incredibly obnoxious best man and longtime enabler, was standing by the door holding a clipboard. Derek had always hated me, mostly because I never laughed at his crude, frat boy jokes in high school. He looked me up and down, his eyes intentionally lingering on the slightly frayed cuffs of my suit jacket and my scuffed shoes. "Liam, wow, you actually made it," Derek smirked loudly, making sure the guests around us could hear. "I honestly wasn't sure if you were here for the actual ceremony, or if the catering manager called you in for an emergency dishwashing shift in the back." A few of the other groomsmen standing nearby snickered loudly, elbowing each other. I looked Derek dead in the eye. I did not flinch. I did not look away. "I am here for my brother, Derek. Now step aside and excuse me." I put my hand firmly and protectively on Leo's shoulder and guided him past the laughing group of grown men acting like high school bullies. I kept my head high and my posture straight, but inside, I was already bleeding out. The storm had not even fully started, and I was already taking on massive amounts of water. I just prayed the reception would go quickly. I prayed to whatever was listening that we could just eat our dinner, politely applaud, and disappear back into the night where we belonged, far away from these monsters. I had absolutely no idea the true hurricane was waiting for us at table 9. We walked into the spectacular grand ballroom to find our assigned seats. The seating chart was a massive, incredibly ornate vintage mirror with the guests' names written in elegant gold calligraphy. I stood in front of it and traced my finger slowly down the long list. Table 1 was the bridal party. Table 2 and 3 were strictly reserved for Elena's high-profile family and Marcus's wealthy corporate executives. Table 4 was my parents and their snobby country club friends. I kept scrolling down. Table 8. Table 9. There it was, written at the very bottom. Liam and Leo. I turned and scanned the massive room. Table 9 was shoved aggressively into the far back corner, completely in the shadows, partially blocked by a massive, load-bearing structural pillar. It was positioned directly in the heavy, drafty hallway leading to the public restrooms. Every single time the heavy wooden kitchen doors swung open, we were aggressively hit with the loud clatter of plates and the strong, chemical smell of industrial dish soap. Seated awkwardly at our table were a few very distant, elderly cousins who barely spoke English, and two completely empty chairs. We were literally, physically placed in the absolute lowest tier of the social hierarchy. It was a physical, undeniable manifestation of exactly where I stood in my mother's heart. Dead last. We sat down quietly. The appetizer salads were already served on the plates. The lettuce was slightly wilted and the dressing had separated, clearly plated hours ago, while the VIP tables got fresh food. "Dad, can I go say hi to Grandma now?" Leo asked eagerly, pointing his little finger toward table 4 near the stage. My mother was heavily holding court, wearing a stunning custom emerald green gown, laughing loudly with a woman dripping in real diamonds. "Let's wait until after dinner is finished, Leo. Grandma is very busy talking to her friends right now," I said gently, trying to protect him from the inevitable rejection. Just then, my mother abruptly stood up from her table to walk toward the bridal suite. Her direct path took her right past the back corner, right past table 9. She walked briskly, her chin raised, her eyes focused straight ahead on the door. "Grandma! Hi, Grandma!" Leo called out cheerfully, waving his little hand high in the air. My mother did not even turn her head. She did not break her stride. She kept walking, her expensive high heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. She completely ignored her own flesh and blood grandson. She walked past us like we were invisible ghosts haunting the venue. Leo's hand slowly lowered back to the table. He looked at me, his eyes wide and deeply confused. "Did she not hear me, Dad? I talked pretty loud." "It is just really loud in here with the music, buddy. She just didn't hear you." I lied through my teeth. My chest burned intensely with a familiar, deeply toxic mix of white-hot anger and crushing sorrow. I looked across the crowded room and briefly locked eyes with my Uncle Raymond. He was sitting comfortably at table 5. He had seen the entire interaction. He knew exactly what my mother had just intentionally done. But instead of saying anything, instead of walking over to say hello to his nephew, Raymond just nervously adjusted his silk tie, completely avoided my gaze, and stared intensely at his water glass. The absolute, pathetic cowardice of my family was astounding. Dinner felt like it lasted for a painful eternity. I forced myself to swallow the dry, overcooked chicken. I carefully helped Leo cut his food into small pieces. I politely made small talk with the elderly cousins about the weather. I focused every ounce of my energy completely on keeping my son happy and distracted, acting as a human shield against the freezing coldness radiating from the rest of the room. Then the chandeliers dimmed. The soft background music faded out completely. A waiter in white gloves brought out a sleek microphone stand and placed it in the center of the dance floor. It was time for the speeches. Derek, the best man, went first. He took the mic, told a few mildly inappropriate jokes that made the older guests uncomfortable, talked endlessly about how great Julian was at golf and closing deals, and finally raised a glass. It was standard, predictable best man material. Then Julian confidently stood up. He buttoned his jacket and walked slowly to the center of the dance floor. The spotlight hit him perfectly, illuminating him like a god. He looked incredibly handsome, overflowing with confidence, and oozing power. Elena sat at the head table, looking at him with genuine, deep love in her eyes. I actually felt a sharp pang of profound pity for her. She was brilliant, but she had absolutely no idea who she was actually marrying. She was marrying a mirage. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," Julian began, his voice incredibly smooth, deep, and perfectly practiced. "They say a man is ultimately judged by the company he keeps. Looking around this beautiful room tonight, at Elena's incredible, supportive family, at my wonderful, loving parents, I truly feel like the luckiest man alive." The crowd collectively awed. My mother dramatically wiped a fake, non-existent tear from her eye with a silk tissue. "Elena, you are my absolute rock," Julian continued smoothly, turning his body completely to his bride. "You have shown me what true, equal partnership really means. You have shown me what it means to build a legacy together, with mutual respect, ambition, and dignity." It was an undeniably good speech. He was hitting all the right emotional notes. For a brief, stupid second, I actually relaxed my tense shoulders. I took a slow sip of my ice water. I thought, maybe I had completely misheard Aunt Beatrice in the hallway. Maybe Julian had decided to take the high road and leave me out of it. Maybe this night would just end quietly, and we could go home in peace. "Family is absolutely everything," Julian said, pacing slightly across the polished wood floor, the microphone held casually in his hand. "Growing up, my amazing parents taught me the vital value of incredibly hard work, of achieving success, of maintaining high standards." He suddenly stopped pacing. He turned his body slightly, angling himself away from Elena and directly toward the dark back of the room, toward the swinging kitchen doors, toward the restrooms, toward table 9. The spotlight operator, clearly instructed and rehearsed beforehand, suddenly widened the bright beam. The harsh, blinding white light cut violently through the dim room and illuminated my table for everyone to see. Every single person at the front tables turned their heads in unison to follow the light. Julian's charming smile instantly changed. It lost every ounce of its warmth and twisted into a sharp, highly calculated, predatory smirk. "And speaking of high standards," Julian said, his voice dropping into a loud, mocking, theatrical tone that echoed off the walls, "I want to take a moment to give a very special shout-out to my older brother, Liam." The silence in the room violently shifted. It was no longer the polite, attentive silence of a wedding speech. It was the heavy, suffocating, pregnant silence that happens right before a massive car crash. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. Beside me, Leo sat up straight in his chair, a huge smile on his face, so excited to hear his dad's name over the big speakers. I stared intensely at Julian, trapped like a deer in the blinding spotlight. The storm had finally arrived, the trap was sprung, and there was absolutely nowhere left to hide. The blinding white light of the professional spotlight pinned me entirely to my cheap, wobbly chair at table 9. It was so intense, so aggressively and violently bright, that for a split second, all I could see was the glowing, sharp outline of my younger brother standing in the absolute center of the polished hardwood dance floor. Julian held the sleek black microphone casually in his right hand, his posture relaxed, looking exactly like a seasoned stand-up comedian waiting for the ultimate punchline to land with his eager audience. The entire room, 200 of the wealthiest, most influential, and most well-connected people in the city, including cutthroat corporate executives, commercial real estate moguls, and my deeply status-obsessed superficial family, turned their heads in perfect, synchronized unison to stare directly at me. And speaking of incredibly high standards, Julian's voice echoed through the massive, state-of-the-art venue sound system, bouncing sharply off the vaulted ceilings and the imported crystal chandeliers. "I want to take a special moment tonight to give a very specific shout-out to my older brother, Liam." My heart did not just skip a beat. It completely and entirely seized in my chest, locking up my lungs. Beside me, my 8-year-old son, Leo, sat up perfectly straight in his chair. His little face, usually so guarded around my family, lit up with absolute, pure, innocent joy. He honestly thought his uncle was about to say something wonderful. He thought, finally, after years of being ignored and sidelined at every single Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas morning, his dad was getting the public recognition and love he deserved. Leo actually smiled, his eyes wide and shining in the dim ambient light of the ballroom. Julian's charming, practiced smile slowly twisted into something entirely unrecognizable. It was a cold, highly calculated, predatory smirk. It was the exact same look he used to give me when we were kids, right before he would break one of my mother's expensive vases and seamlessly blame it on me. He leaned slightly forward into the microphone, locking his eyes directly with mine through the blinding beam of the spotlight. Liam has always been such a unique, interesting example to me, Julian continued, his tone completely dripping with heavy, condescending sarcasm that masked itself as brotherly banter. He is a single father, completely alone in the world, unwanted by absolutely anyone else. I mean, just look at him, sitting way back there in the dark corner, wearing a suit he probably bought at a thrift store discount rack. A low, collective murmur of confused chuckles rolled slowly through the front VIP tables. The sound was physically sickening. My stomach dropped like a lead weight, crashing straight through the floor and into the concrete foundation of the building. I thought I had misheard him. I desperately, frantically wanted to believe that the acoustics in the massive room were simply playing cruel tricks on my mind. I wanted to believe that my own flesh and blood would not cross this definitive line. But Julian kept going, his voice growing significantly louder, more arrogant, and more confident, actively feeding off the hesitant energy of the wealthy crowd. But seriously, everyone, let's hear it for him tonight. It takes a massive, unbelievable amount of guts to show up here today, to sit in a room full of successful people, when your own life is that much of an absolute, unmitigated disaster. Give it up for the ultimate cautionary tale. My big brother, Liam. The hesitant, polite chuckles suddenly morphed into a massive, rolling, deafening roar. The entire ballroom erupted into laughter. This was not polite wedding laughter. It was real, deep, unfiltered, viciously mocking laughter. People at the front VIP tables, people I had never even met, were actually clinking their expensive champagne glasses together like Julian had just delivered the greatest, most brilliant comedic joke of the century. I was completely paralyzed. My hands gripped the edge of the tablecloth so hard that my knuckles turned completely white, and my fingernails dug painfully into my own palms. The heat rushed violently to my face, burning my cheeks, making my ears ring with a high-pitched frequency. It felt exactly like I had been physically struck across the jaw with a baseball bat. It felt like I was standing completely naked in front of a firing squad of my own relatives. This was not just a mean, offhand comment. It was a highly orchestrated public execution of my character, designed specifically to elevate Julian's status in front of his new, wealthy in-laws. Then, I felt a small, trembling tug on the sleeve of my cheap suit jacket. I slowly turned my head, fighting through the paralyzing shock. Leo was looking up at me. His bright, excited, hopeful smile had completely vanished, rapidly replaced by a look of pure, devastating, heartbreaking confusion. His little eyebrows were tightly furrowed, and his bottom lip was quivering uncontrollably. His innocent voice cut straight through the deafening noise of 200 adults laughing at our expense. "Dad," Leo whispered, his voice cracking with heavy emotion. "Why is Uncle Julian saying those mean things about you? Why are all these people laughing at you?" I opened my mouth to speak. I wanted to tell him it was just a bad joke. I wanted to somehow magically shield his young, impressionable mind from the pure, unadulterated evil radiating from the center of the room. I wanted to tell him that adults sometimes say stupid things, but before I could even swallow the massive, choking lump of grief in my throat, my mother's voice pierced the air like a jagged knife. Eleanor did not even need to use a microphone. She proudly stood up from her prime seat at table 4, violently adjusting the bodice of her custom emerald green gown, making absolutely sure her shrill voice carried perfectly over the lingering waves of laughter. "He is a used product," my mother yelled at the top of her lungs, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly in my direction, ensuring everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. But hey, at least he stayed hidden in the back corner by the bathrooms and didn't ruin the professional wedding photos with his depressing face. The laughter in the room grew sharper. It grew infinitely, exponentially crueler. It was the specific, targeted kind of laughter that strips you entirely bare, that cuts straight through your skin and shatters your bones into dust. It was the exact, defining moment in my 34 years of life where I realized, with absolute, terrifying clarity, that these people did not see me as a human being. They did not see me as family. They saw me strictly as pure entertainment. as a convenient punching bag designed to make them feel vastly superior about their own shallow, empty lives. My own mother, the woman who carried me for 9 months, the woman who was supposed to love me unconditionally and protect me from the cruelty of the world, had just publicly endorsed and amplified my humiliation. She had actively, joyfully participated in slaughtering my dignity in front of my little boy. I looked frantically around the room, searching the endless sea of laughing, heavily Botoxed faces, hoping to find just one single person with a shred of basic human decency. I looked at Uncle Raymond. He aggressively stared down at his half-eaten salad plate, his shoulders hunched in absolute cowardice. I looked at Derek, the best man, who was practically bent over double, slapping his knee with laughter. I thought about the grueling, endless double shifts at the freezing logistics warehouse. I thought about the countless nights I stayed up until 3 in the morning studying for online certification courses just to try and secure a marginally better salary for my son. I thought about the brutal divorce, the grueling, terrifying legal fight for full custody, the agonizing moments of sitting at my kitchen table wondering how I was going to pay the electric bill so Leo would have heat in the winter. I had sacrificed absolutely everything I had to be a good, honest father, and in 30 seconds, my family had turned my entire life's work into a disgusting, cheap punchline for a room full of strangers. I looked back down at Leo. A single, heavy tear rolled slowly down his cheek, landing silently on the lapel of his little navy blazer. That single tear was the exact catalyst I needed. The paralyzing, freezing shock instantly evaporated from my veins, rapidly replaced by a cold, sharp, unyielding, titanium resolve. The absolute worst thing you can ever do to a devoted father is hurt his innocent child. I aggressively pushed my chair back. It scraped loudly and harshly against the polished marble floor, making a terrible screeching sound. I did not care about causing a scene anymore. I did not care about ruining the carefully curated aesthetic of their perfect, million-dollar evening. I was going to stand up, grab my son's hand, walk straight out of those heavy oak doors, and never, ever look back for as long as I lived. I was ready to permanently sever every single tie I had to this toxic, diseased bloodline. I stood incredibly tall, smoothing down the front of my cheap clearance rack suit with deliberate precision. I reached down and gently wrapped my large, calloused hand around Leo's small, trembling fingers. "Come on, buddy," I said softly, my voice miraculously steady and devoid of the panic tearing me apart inside. "We are leaving right now. We are going home." I turned my back on the blinding spotlight. I took exactly one definitive step toward the glowing red exit sign. And then, a sharp, deafening, ear-piercing screech of audio feedback violently pierced the air, echoing painfully through the speakers and forcing several guests to cover their ears. The laughter died instantly. It was as if someone had thrown a massive breaker switch, plunging the entire chaotic room into total, absolute silence. I stopped in my tracks and turned around slowly. Elena, the beautiful, incredibly wealthy bride, had stood up from the massive head table. She did not look amused. She did not look embarrassed or flustered. She looked absolutely terrifyingly furious. Her face was pale. Her jaw was set like absolute stone, and her eyes were burning with a cold, terrifying intensity that commanded instant submission. She did not look at the crowd. She did not look at my mother. She gathered the heavy, expensive silk fabric of her custom wedding gown in one hand, marched directly and purposefully across the dance floor toward Julian, and snatched the microphone right out of his hand with aggressive, undeniable force. Julian stumbled back a clumsy step, looking completely bewildered and utterly foolish. His arrogant smirk immediately faltered, replaced by a look of genuine, panicky confusion. "Elena, babe, what are you doing? It was just a joke. Come on." Elena did not answer him. She turned her back on him completely, rendering him entirely irrelevant. She faced the massive crowd, holding the microphone with the confident, terrifying grip of a seasoned CEO about to fire an entire corporate boardroom. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum. You could literally hear the ice melting in the crystal water glasses. I stood frozen near table 9, still holding Leo's hand tightly, my heart hammering in my chest. I thought the worst part of the night was over. I thought the drama had peaked. I was so incredibly wrong. The real destruction, the absolute leveling of my brother's entire existence, was just about to begin. Elena stood firmly in the absolute center of the grand ballroom, her immaculate white gown glowing ethereally under the dimmed chandeliers. She possessed a commanding, overwhelming presence that you simply cannot buy with new money. It was the kind of fierce, unwavering authority inherited from a lifetime of watching massive corporate empires being aggressively built and ruthlessly dismantled by her father. She raised the microphone slowly to her lips. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was not shaking with feminine hysteria. It was not emotional or tearful. It was ice-cold, perfectly articulated, and ruthlessly, terrifyingly steady. I was fully prepared to sign a legally binding marriage license today, Elena began, her crisp words cutting through the dead silence of the room like a perfectly sharpened surgical scalpel. I was prepared to merge my life, my family's extensive legacy, and my financial future with Julian. I honestly thought I was marrying a man of ambition, a man of integrity, and a man of solid character. She paused deliberately, letting the heavy, weighted words hang in the air for maximum impact. Julian shifted incredibly uncomfortably behind her, his face rapidly draining of all color until he looked physically ill. He reached out a trembling hand to touch her arm, whispering something frantic and desperate that the microphone didn't quite catch, but Elena aggressively and sharply swatted his hand away without even bothering to look at him. However, Elena continued, projecting her voice powerfully to the very back of the room, aiming her gaze directly toward my mother's VIP table. Right before the ceremony this afternoon, my father's head corporate attorney handed me a highly detailed, deeply disturbing legal folder. A folder compiled by a team of private investigators. A folder that contained the absolute, unvarnished, documented truth about the man standing behind me. A collective, theatrical gasp rippled rapidly through the wealthy crowd. My mother, Eleanor, gripped the edge of her table with both hands, her emerald green gown suddenly looking less like royalty and more like a cheap, desperate costume. Elena turned her head slightly, glaring at Julian over her shoulder with absolute disgust. Julian loves to talk extensively about high standards. He loves to brag to all of my father's friends about his lucrative, fast-paced career in commercial real estate. He loves to parade around the city in his brand-new, jet-black Porsche. But here is the actual reality, ladies and gentlemen. Elena reached smoothly into a hidden pocket tailored into the seams of her gown and pulled out a folded, thick stack of crisp, white legal documents. She held them high up in the air for the entire room to see, shaking them slightly so the paper rustled loudly into the microphone. Julian does not have a career in commercial real estate, Elena announced, her voice echoing powerfully and decisively. He was quietly and unceremoniously fired 3 months ago for gross incompetence, insubordination, and suspected embezzlement of company funds. That beautiful, shiny Porsche parked on the red carpet outside? It is heavily leased, incredibly past due on payments, and is actively pending legal repossession as we speak. And those expensive tailored suits he wears to look like a millionaire. She turned fully to face Julian, who was now visibly trembling, his perfect, gelled hair suddenly looking disheveled as absolute panic set in. He looked like a deer staring down a freight train. You are currently drowning in over $250,000 of secret, high-interest credit card debt and predatory personal loans, Elena stated, reading the exact figures directly from the legal summary in her hand. You have a $45,000 credit card bill solely from a vacation to Aspen that you claimed was a fully paid corporate business trip. You took out a $15,000 loan just to buy the Rolex currently sitting on your wrist. You are actively facing a massive civil lawsuit from your former employer. You lied to me about your salary. You lied to me about your promotions. You plan to use our marriage, and specifically my family's private, irrevocable trust fund, as your own personal financial bailout to save yourself from absolute, impending ruin. The ballroom immediately erupted into absolute, uncontained chaos. Shocked whispers violently escalated into loud, frantic, overlapping conversations. Wealthy socialites were practically clutching their pearls and fanning themselves. Marcus, Elena's father and the ruthless CEO of a multimillion-dollar tech empire, sat completely relaxed at table 2 with his arms crossed over his chest. His face was completely devoid of any emotion, calmly watching the precise public execution he had clearly orchestrated behind the scenes. Julian's arrogant, untouchable facade completely and utterly collapsed. He looked like a terrified, cornered, pathetic animal. "Elena, please, I can explain everything. It's just a temporary cash flow problem. I love you. You can't do this to me in front of all these people. Not today. You didn't seem to have a single problem humiliating your own flesh and blood in front of all these people." Elena shot back, her voice finally raising a decibel, heavily laced with pure, righteous venom. She turned away from Julian, dismissing his existence entirely, and began walking across the vast dance floor, moving directly toward the dark corner, moving directly toward table 9, moving directly toward me and Leo. The crowd of wealthy guests literally parted for her like the Red Sea. My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs as she stopped right in front of us. Elena looked down at Leo. Her cold, ruthless corporate demeanor instantly melted away, softening into genuine warmth. She crouched down slightly, her expensive gown pooling on the floor, so she was exactly at eye level with my terrified son. "Hi, Leo," she said, her voice incredibly gentle and soothing. "Your uncle was very, very wrong tonight. He is a liar. I want you to listen to me very carefully, okay?" Leo nodded slowly, his big eyes wide with wonder. Elena stood back up, squared her shoulders, and looked me dead in the eye. Then, she raised the microphone again, ensuring her voice carried absolute authority. "Liam," she said, making sure every single person in the room heard her clearly. "You are wearing a suit that might not be custom-tailored in Italy, but you wear it with an unbelievable amount of honor and dignity. You work 2 exhausting, back-breaking jobs to provide for your family. You fought a brutal, emotionally draining legal custody battle because you absolutely refused to abandon your son when things got hard. You put every single spare penny you earn into a college fund for this little boy. You do not lie. You do not steal. You are a real father. You are a real man. And you are worth 10 of the cowards standing on that stage." I felt a massive, overwhelming, crushing wave of emotion crash over me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't form a single word. I just stood there, gripping Leo's hand like a lifeline, feeling the hot sting of tears threatening to spill over my eyelids. For 8 long, agonizing years, I had been told repeatedly by my own family that I was a complete failure. For 8 years, I had operated silently in the shadows, deeply believing I was entirely worthless. And here, in front of the very people who had just mocked me, a woman of immense power and wealth was validating my entire existence. Elena turned her fierce, burning gaze toward table 4, toward my mother, who was sitting frozen in her chair. "And to Eleanor," Elena said, her voice dropping into a low register that was terrifyingly calm and incredibly lethal. "To stand there in your expensive dress and joyfully call your own son a used product, while blindly enabling, funding, and protecting a lying, fraudulent parasite like Julian. It tells me absolutely everything I will ever need to know about the genetic makeup and moral bankruptcy of this family. I will not attach my name, my reputation, or my future inheritance to a bloodline that views cruelty as humor and deceit as a strategy." My mother opened her mouth to speak. Her face flushed a dark, dangerous purple with absolute rage and deep, profound embarrassment, but no words came out. She was completely, utterly silenced by the sheer weight of the truth. Elena walked slowly back to the center of the room. She stood directly in front of Julian, who was now weeping openly, tears streaming down his face, begging her not to ruin his life. Elena didn't even blink. She reached up to her left hand, smoothly slid the massive, flawless 4-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger, and held it suspended in the air for a brief, agonizing moment. "This wedding is officially over," Elena declared. She dropped the heavy diamond ring. It hit the polished hardwood floor with a sharp, distinct, heavy clink that echoed loudly in the dead silent room. She dropped the microphone right next to it, turned on her heel, and walked straight toward the exit without ever looking back. "Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey." The immediate, chaotic aftermath of Elena walking powerfully out of those heavy oak doors was something I will remember vividly, with absolute clarity, for the rest of my natural life. The entire grand ballroom was suspended in a bizarre state of collective paralyzed shock. Absolutely no one moved a muscle. The string quartet in the corner had completely stopped playing their instruments, their bows hovering awkwardly over the strings. The catering waiters stood frozen like statues against the walls, holding silver trays of expensive champagne that absolutely no one was going to drink. Julian fell heavily to his knees on the dance floor. He was desperately searching the hardwood floor for the diamond ring Elena had dropped, crying hysterically, his hands shaking violently. His perfect, tailored Italian tuxedo was wrinkled and ruined. His hair was a sweaty mess. The carefully constructed facade of the golden child, the brilliant real estate mogul, the perfect son, was permanently shattered into a million irreparable pieces for everyone to witness. My mother, Eleanor, finally snapped out of her paralyzed, humiliated state. She practically scrambled out of her chair, her expensive emerald gown tangling clumsily around her ankles. She ran frantically toward table 2, bypassing her own weeping son entirely, aiming directly for Marcus, Elena's father, who was still calmly sipping his aged scotch. "Marcus, Marcus, please, you have to listen to me, we can fix this," my mother pleaded loudly. Her voice was shrill, desperate, and entirely devoid of her usual, carefully practiced country club sophistication. "It's just a massive misunderstanding. Julian is a good, smart boy. We can pay off whatever small debts he has. We have equity in the house. Do not let Elena do this to our families. Think of the public scandal." Marcus slowly lowered his heavy crystal glass to the table. He did not stand up. He did not raise his voice. He did not show an ounce of pity. He looked up at my mother with the kind of absolute, chilling, predatory indifference that you only see in ruthless corporate takeovers. "Eleanor," Marcus said, his deep, gravelly voice carrying easily across the silent room, "your son is a pathological fraud, and you are a deeply vicious, foolish woman. If Julian attempts to contact my daughter ever again, by phone, email, or through a third party, I will personally ensure the pending corporate lawsuit against him includes a thorough, forensic investigation into every single financial transaction your family has ever made. My private security team will escort you and your son out of this venue right now. Do not make a scene." My mother physically recoiled as if she had been violently slapped across the face. The absolute social ruin she had always feared, the loss of her precious status, had just materialized in front of 200 of her most influential peers. She looked frantically around the room, making desperate eye contact with her wealthy friends, hoping for someone, anyone, to intervene or offer support. But they all aggressively looked away. Some literally turned their backs. No one wanted to associate with the disgraced family that just tried to run a financial scam on Marcus's empire. I looked down at Leo. He was staring at the chaos unfolding, his little hands gripping mine tightly. "Dad?" Leo whispered, looking up at me. "Are we still leaving?" I looked at Julian sobbing pathetically on the floor, still searching for the ring. I looked at my mother being ushered aggressively toward the exit by 2 massive men in black security suits. I felt an incredible, overwhelming, beautiful sense of lightness expand in my chest. The heavy, suffocating chains of shame, guilt, and inadequacy that I had dragged around for my entire life had just been shattered by the truth. Yes, "Buddy?" I said, a genuine, wide, unrestricted smile spreading across my face for the first time in years. "We are leaving." I tightened my grip on his small hand and we walked straight down the center aisle of the ballroom. I didn't rush. I didn't keep my head down like I usually did. I walked with my shoulders pulled back and my spine perfectly straight. As we passed the VIP tables, the wealthy guests, the exact same people who had been laughing at me 5 minutes earlier, literally parted to make way for us. Some of them looked at me with genuine, deep respect. Some of them looked deeply ashamed of their own behavior. When we finally pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air, it felt like I was breathing oxygen for the very first time. We walked past the valet stand and I unlocked the doors to my beat-up, 10-year-old sedan. It wasn't a leased Porsche, but to me, in that exact moment, it felt like a golden chariot. I buckled Leo safely into the back seat. As I climbed into the driver's seat and started the reliable engine, Leo leaned forward against his seatbelt. "Dad?" he asked, his young voice full of absolute awe. "Did we just win?" I looked at his sweet face in the rearview mirror. I thought about the brutal years of working night shifts at the hotel, the agonizing divorce, the constant fear of not being enough of a man to raise him right. "Yes, Leo," I said firmly, putting the car in drive and pulling out of the estate. "We absolutely won." But the universe, in all its infinite wisdom, wasn't quite finished delivering karma. What I didn't know as I drove home that night, listening to the radio with my son, was that Sarah, the professional wedding photographer hired by Marcus, had kept her high-definition video camera rolling the entire time. Sarah was a fiercely independent single mother herself, fighting her own brutal custody battles against a toxic ex-husband. When Julian had made that disgusting joke about single parents, she saw red. When Elena dropped the microphone, Sarah made absolutely sure every single second of the confrontation was recorded in crystal clear audio and video. By the time I woke up the next morning and made our Sunday pancakes, my cell phone was practically melting from notifications. Sarah had posted the raw, unedited footage to multiple social media platforms. It hadn't just gotten a few hundred views. It had exploded. The internet absolutely loves a story of undeniable, righteous justice. Millions of people watched my brother get utterly destroyed by the bride. Millions of people heard my mother brutally call me a used product. And millions of strangers stood up for me, leaving comments that finally validated my entire journey as a father. The fallout over the next 6 months was absolute, comprehensive, and entirely permanent. The viral wedding video completely obliterated whatever pathetic shreds were left of my family's fabricated reputation. They became a localized cautionary tale. Julian's life unraveled with a terrifying, almost beautiful speed. The commercial real estate company he had supposedly worked for officially filed a massive civil lawsuit against him for the embezzled funds. Without Elena's trust fund to bail him out, the heavily leased Porsche was aggressively repossessed from my parents' driveway in broad daylight by a tow truck, right in front of all the nosy neighbors. His credit was completely ruined. He was forced to move back into his childhood bedroom, the exact same room they had aggressively charged me $600 a month to live in, except Julian wasn't paying a single dime. My mother, Eleanor, was officially and unceremoniously ostracized from her beloved country club. The women she used to gossip with completely cut her off, terrified of being publicly associated with the viral evil mother-in-law from the internet video. Her social calendar evaporated overnight. But my life completely and miraculously transformed. About 3 weeks after the disastrous non-wedding, I received a phone call from an unknown, out-of-state number. It was Marcus. He didn't call to apologize for the drama. He called because, being the thorough CEO he had his corporate HR department run a deep background check on me after Elena told him about my incredible work ethic. Marcus saw the documented proof that I had been working at the logistics warehouse for 8 solid years, never missing a single shift, while simultaneously managing the night audit at the hotel with perfect attendance. He didn't offer me a handout or charity. He offered me a highly demanding, high-paying position as a regional logistics director for his massive corporate supply chain. It came with a massive salary increase that tripled my current income, full comprehensive health benefits, and a generous 401k matching program. I accepted it immediately. I quit my 2 exhausting jobs, and for the first time in Leo's life, I was actually home every single evening to make him a proper dinner, help him with his math homework, and tuck him into bed. I finally had enough disposable money to aggressively fully fund his $529 college savings account. Then, right on cue, came the final, pathetic attempts at manipulation from the ghosts of my past. When the local news of my new corporate promotion and substantial salary became public knowledge through LinkedIn, guess who suddenly decided she missed being a devoted mother? Chloe, my ex-wife, the exact same woman who had callously abandoned a 5-month-old baby to sign divorce papers so she could go party. She showed up completely unannounced at my apartment complex one rainy Tuesday afternoon. She stood nervously on my welcome mat, crying dramatic crocodile tears, talking about how she had made a terrible, youthful mistake, how she had done so much intensive therapy, and how she just wanted us to be a happy family again. She clearly saw the viral video, saw the direct connection to Marcus's massive corporate empire, and desperately wanted a piece of the financial pie. I didn't yell. I didn't get emotional or angry. I stood calmly in the doorway, physically blocking her view of the warm apartment inside. I looked at her with the exact same cold, absolute indifference that Marcus had shown my mother. "You lost all legal and physical custody of Leo 8 years ago, Chloe," I said smoothly, my voice completely devoid of any affection. "If you ever step foot on my property again, my corporate lawyer will file a restraining order and harassment charges so fast it will literally make your head spin. You do not get to abandon the foundation when it is pouring rain and then show up when the mansion is fully built. You are nothing to us. Goodbye." I shut the heavy door right in her face and locked the deadbolt. I didn't feel a single shred of guilt. A month later, the final domino fell. My phone rang, and the caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it go straight to voicemail. She left a pathetic, 3-minute, sobbing message. She told me Julian was officially facing Chapter 7 bankruptcy, that my father's retirement pension was taking a massive hit from the exorbitant legal defense fees, and that they desperately needed a short-term loan just to keep the house out of foreclosure. She ended the voicemail by crying, "Please, Liam, you have to help us. We are your family." I listened to the entire message while sitting comfortably in my new, spacious corner office, looking out at the city skyline. I didn't call her back. I didn't wire the money to save them. I simply typed out a single, brief text message. "I am not your scapegoat anymore. I am a used product, remember? Do not ever contact me again." Then, I permanently blocked her number, Julian's number, and the number of every other toxic relative who had sat silently in that ballroom. I realized something incredibly profound sitting in the quiet peace of my new life. I didn't need a grand, sweeping apology from my family. I didn't need them to suddenly recognize my worth or validate my painful struggles. I just needed to completely stop waiting for their permission to see the immense, undeniable value in myself. My son, Leo, is absolutely thriving. He is the smartest, kindest, most resilient kid I know. He doesn't ask about his grandmother or his uncle anymore. He knows exactly who his real family is. And the most beautiful part is that he looks at the world with a fierce sense of justice. He knows that being kind does not make you weak, and that standing up for yourself, even when your voice shakes, is the most powerful thing a person can do. We walked out of that toxic ballroom with absolutely nothing but our dignity, and it turned out to be the only currency that actually mattered. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If you take anything away from my experience, let it be this: being alone does not mean you are unwanted. Your bloodline does not dictate your worth, and you have every right to aggressively protect your peace and walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own sanity? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong, everyone,